All right, Shalom Akim. First and foremost, before I begin this lesson, all praise, honor, and glory is to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Honors to all you brothers out there that's also laboring in his work, pushing out this gospel in all truth, faith, and sincerity. So yeah, in this lesson, I want to deal with a question that I got on a comment board from a brother. All right, I want to center this lesson around that question, which I perceive the brother was sincere, and he sincerely want to be edified. And through the spirit and power of Yahweh Bashim Yahushua, I hope this lesson is edifying, all right? And again, Salaki to the brother, if it took a minute for me to get around to answering your question, but, you know, we roll through the spirit. So, you know, there's a lot of other lessons that came up, you know, that I had to deal with. But nevertheless, we here, and I'm going to address this question. And through the spirit and power of Yahweh Bashim Yahushua, again, I hope you are edified, all right? So this the question from the brother Charles Session. It says, can you explain Genesis 3 and 7, please, Baba Kusha? Right, and we're going to explain it. But before I really get into the lesson, I just want to make mention of something. When you read the scriptures, especially the book of Genesis and the book of Revelation, these are two of the most difficult books, if you will, to break down, all right? And coming up in this society, when you, in this system, you go to school, all right, the schooling, you read certain books, whether it's a history book, you know, a language, literature book, math book, social studies. Well, usually the idea is the first chapter is the easiest chapter in that book. And what can happen is you'll subconsciously bring that idea to the Bible. A lot of people do that. Even I did that at one point. You overlook Genesis as if, well, it's just the first chapter, all right? And you will take it as being literal. But what you come to find out is Genesis is a very heavy book. It's a very allegorical book, a book full of parables, all right? And when you read certain scriptures in the book of Genesis, it have a lot of different meanings. And the Apostle Gabar even made mention of that these scriptures is like onions. They have different layers, all right? Now, there are some scriptures in the Bible that have one meaning. For instance, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not murder. Well, that's to the point. But then there's other scriptures that have a lot of different meanings. It cover a lot of bases. It's, you know, it's twofold or threefold, fourfold in some cases. And a good example to give you is like you come in your bedroom and you turn on a light. Well, that light just don't cover one side of the room. It covers the whole room. And that's how these scriptures are. There's a lot of scriptures in the Bible that covers everything. One precept cover a whole lot, all right? So with that, let's get right into it. This is the book of Genesis. I'm going to start at, we'll start at verse 5. This is Genesis 3 and 5. For the Most High doeth know that in the day that ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be open, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. All right? So keep that in mind. It says, and when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. And the eyes of them were both open, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together, and made themselves aprons. Now this is the verse what we're going to focus on, all right? This is what the brother asked about. Now when you read where it says, and the eyes of them both were open, this means they understood good and evil, like we read in the 5th verse, all right? And that's dealing with the state of Israel even to this very day. This is not only just dealing with Adam and Eve. This is a scripture that has layers to it. This is really a foreshadowing of Israel, all right, in the state that we are in. Because you got to remember, Israel was a naive nation, if you will. We only knew the Most High until we was introduced to all these other nations, these different philosophies. And it's sort of like a woman. When you deal with a woman, if you, you know, you get a woman at a certain age and she only knows you, all right? So she pretty much is going to be naive. She's only going to be under your vibration. But when she grow up a little and start feeling herself and she go to meeting other men, then her eyes become open and she go to looking at other men, right? And she go to desiring after other men. That's how Israel dealt with the Most High. That was treacherous what we did. We was under him and his laws and we was under that covenant with him, that agreement. But once our eyes were open, we started following all these different other customs. All right, our people call themselves African Americans and Kemet, Black consciousness, Egyptians and Islam. All right, we follow after Cesare Borgia. So that's a form of your eyes being open. Now, when it says they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons, well, this is dealing with covering yourself with different philosophies, all right? Instead of covering yourself with your true identity, calling yourself an Israelite, you're calling yourself Moors, African Americans, all right? Now, to further go into that, I want to read verse 8. It says, "And they heard the voice of the Lord power walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord power amongst the trees of the garden." All right? Now, when you read this, a lot of people read this literal, but this is a metaphor for the state of Israel today. Now, when the scriptures say they hid themselves amongst the trees in the garden, the trees is symbolic to the other nations. The Lord calls the other nations trees. And how do we hide ourselves from the Lord? By sowing those leaves, all right? Sowing those leaves from the trees, which is their philosophies, over us, covering us with those leaves, man. Again, the trees represent the other nation, and the leaves represent their philosophies. All right? So, to further prove this, let's get the book of Ezekiel, chapter 31. And let's start at verse 2, all right? "Son of man, speak unto Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and to his multitude, whom art thou like in thy greatness? Behold, the Assyrian was a cedar in Lebanon, with fair branches, and with a shadowing shroud, and of an high stature, and his top was among the thick boughs. The waters made him great, the deep set him up on high, with her rivers running around about his plants, and sent out her little rivers unto all the trees of the field." Right, so this is dealing with Egypt, all right, which is pretty much talking about America, but it's comparing it to a great tree. And it's talking about how it pretty much sent her rivers unto the trees of the field, which is the other nations. Verse 5, "Therefore his height was exalted above all the trees of the field." You see? That's not talking about a literal tree. The Lord compared the nations to trees. And the field is the world. And to support that, this is Matthew chapter 13 and verse 38. "The field is the world. See, the good seed are the children of the kingdom, but the tares are the children of the wicked one." Right, so the field is symbolic to the world. So when you read Ezekiel 31, Ezekiel 31 and 4, it says, "The waters made him great, the deep set him up on high, with her rivers running around about his plants, and sent out her little rivers unto all the trees of the field." Basically, that's saying all the other nations in the world, all right? Because there's an old saying in the world, which is pretty much a spiritual saying, family tree, all right? Each nation is compared to a tree, all right? So it says, therefore his height was exalted above all the trees of the field. And his boughs were multiplied, and his branches became long because of the multitude of waters when he shot forth. See, all the fowls of heaven made their nests in his boughs, and under his branches did all the beasts of the field bring forth their young, and under his shadow dwelt all great nations. Thus was he fair in his greatness, in the length of his branches, for his root was by great waters. The cedars in the garden of the Most High could not hide him. Right. So you see where when you read in Genesis where it talk about the garden, well, this is pretty much the garden is talking about the inhabitants, those, because trees are inhabited in a garden, right? So it says the fir trees were not like his boughs, and the chestnut trees were not like his branches. Nor any tree in the garden of the Most High was like unto him in his beauty. See? I have made him fair by the multitude of his branches, so that all the trees of Eden that were in the garden of the Most High envied him. So again, this is not literally talking about trees. What is the writer, Ezekiel, going to waste his ink talking about trees, man? Literal trees. All right? This is dealing with the other nations and nations as a whole, all right? So when you go back to Genesis 3 and 8, it says, and they heard the voice of the Lord power walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord power amongst the trees of the garden. That means us as a nation, we are covering ourselves. When you hide, you covering yourself. All right? You covering yourself from the presence of the Lord. And this is actually being fulfilled today. When it says they heard the voice of the Lord walking in the garden in the cool of the day, that's talking about guys like myself and all the men of Great Millstone. We the voice of the Lord. And when we come to our people, they hide behind they philosophies, man. They hide behind everything that's contrary to this truth, to their true nationality. They cover themselves with the figs of the fig leaves. So this is a prophecy concerning Israel, and mainly our main resistance is these black Kemet, black consciousness, and even those so-called Christians who call yourself African Americans. You have not come back to your nationality. All right? This is Ezekiel chapter 30 and verse let me see what is that. Bear with me 1 second. I can right. That's the book of Isaiah. All right. This is the book of Isaiah, chapter 30 and verse 1. Woe to the rebellious children, saith the Lord, that take counsel, but not of me. Again, that's hiding behind the other trees. They don't hide behind Israel or the fact that they're Israelite. They take counsel of these other doctrines, whether calling themselves Islam or they follow the so-called Christianity, following after that white savior, Cesare Borgia, that Jesus Christ, all right, or either calling themselves Egyptians, all right, the motherland, we from Africa. Well, that's taking counsel, but not of the Lord. It says, and that cover with a covering, but not of my spirit, that they may add sin to sin. See, they cover with a covering, which basically lines up with Genesis 3 and 7. And the eyes of them both were open, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. That's covering with another covering besides the Most High. All right? And also that's hiding themselves amongst the trees of the garden, which again, the trees are the other nations or the nations in general. That's a buzzword that the Lord uses to describe the nations. This is Ezekiel chapter 17, starting at the top. And the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, put forth a riddle and speak a parable unto the house of Israel. So you see the essence of the Lord. When he was talking in the book of Genesis about that apron, he could have just came out and said, look, Israel is going to follow after other philosophies. No, but he put forth a riddle, all right? Verse 3, and say, thus saith the Lord power, a great eagle with great wings, long-winged, full of feathers, which had diverse colors, came into Lebanon. And we know that that's dealing with the so-called white man, the eagle, all right? And took the highest branch of the cedar. And that's dealing with Israel, again, being compared to what? A tree. He chopped off the top of his young twigs and carried it into the land of traffic. And what's the land of traffic? America. Because when you go into that word traffic, it actually means trade. All right? So this is the land of trade. All right? The World Trade Center. All right? He set it in a city of merchants. Again, this is America. So a long eagle came, an eagle, which is the so-called white man, Esau, he came and took the highest branch, which is what? Israel, and set us in the land of merchants. Again, proving that the trees in the garden that we just read in Genesis, the 3rd chapter, all right, is symbolic to nations. He took also the seed of the land and planted it in a fruitful field. He placed it by a great water and set it as a willow tree. And it grew and became a spreading vine of low stature. Yeah, and that's talking about us as a nation. We grew, all right, because our people are like the sand of the sea, man. But we grew into of a low stature, all right? We are in a low state right now. Whose branches turned toward him and the roots thereof were under him, right? So we turned toward the white man for everything. So it became a vine and brought forth branches and shot forth sprigs. See? So now you see where the nations represent trees, and the leaves, which Adam and Eve sewed on them and made themselves an apron, all right, was pretty much the philosophies from those trees. And that's what our people do today. Adam and Eve, that is symbolic to our nation today, covering themselves with other philosophies. All right? That was another scripture that came to mind. Let me see if that might be matter of fact, let me do a quick search, see if it come up. Bear with me 1 second, all right? Right. This is Revelation 3:18. I counsel thee to buy of me gold tried in the fire, that thou mayest be rich, and white raiment, that thou mayest be clothed. So again, when dealing with Adam and Eve sewing fig leaves, making an apron out of it, that's opposite of these white clothes, which is this truth, which is knowing that you're an Israelite. All right? And that thy shame of thy nakedness do not appear. And anoint thine eyes with eye salve, that thou mayest see. All right? Another verse, Revelation 16:15, behold, I come as a thief. Blessed is he that watcheth and keepeth his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame. All right? So that word naked is not just thrown around. This actually goes back to Genesis 3:7. And the eyes of them were both open, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. When you're naked, that means you're not covering with this knowledge. You're not covering with the knowledge of knowing that you're an Israelite. The names of Yahweh, Yahweh Shah, the true doctrine of the Lord. You naked. Then once you do cover yourself, you cover yourself with the fig leaves of the trees, which is other philosophies. If you're not calling yourself an Israelite in truth, all right, then that means that you're covered in something else. Just a quick example, sports, all right? People have to wear uniforms to distinguish what team they are. You got a certain team playing another team. What distinguishes those two different teams? Their uniforms, all right? And that's how the Lord is distinguishing who's who. That's how we distinguish who's who. You walk up and you got on the uniform of Islam, then we know that you're not one of the Lord's. All right? You pretty much naked and you sewing fig leaves, which in reality, when you sew, if you make an apron out of fig leaves, you still naked. That's not a good fabric to make clothing out of, or a garment, because it is not going to stay. It's going to dry out. Those leaves is going to dry up. All right, going to start crumbling. So you get the point. You got to really just use your mind, all right, and your insight when dealing with these scriptures. So yeah, the video kind of ran a little long. I did want to make it quick and precise as possible, but as long as you were edified, the brother Charles Sessions and whoever else might have come across this video. So with that, shalom.